The stadium lights made the polished floor of the university auditorium gleam like a river turned to glass. And as the brass band struck its final rehearsal note, the ushers performed their last sweep down the aisles, straightening programs, aligning bottled water with the gravity of surgeons prepping an operating room. I was at the end of row M, third seat from the aisle. My niece Sia's name circled in blue ink on the printed program. A faint tang of floor wax and carnations rising from the stage. The bracelet lay cool around my wrist, a slender platinum rope with a small clasp that clicked like a typewriter key when it locked, and its weight, familiar and steady, felt like my mother's hand, like history made portable. Next to me, my sister Nadia shifted her perfume, a sweet, powdery drift that never quite masked the metallic scent of nerves. And when she touched my forearm to point out where the valedictorian's parents were seated, her nail grazed the skin just enough to mark ownership without leaving evidence. I had slept for hours and woke clear, the way I do before audits and board presentations. That narrow corridor of calm where every list in my mind stacks perfectly. My tote zipped, the letters folded, the thin envelope sealed and initialed. The chain of custody form inside bearing a time stamp in my neat print. The air was cool in the aisles and warm in the light slanting through the high windows. The stage crew's shirts were dark with heat at the spine. We rose when the procession began, faculty in a river of color. The registrar's mace flashing briefly beneath the lights. And I clapped. I cheered. I let the ceremony carry me like a tide. Aisha's friends had decorated their caps with glitter and elaborate puns. She had left hers plain because she was the kind who believed every achievement should be clean, earned, witnessed. When we sat, Nadia leaned in and said, just this side of a whisper, "You should tuck your bag under your seat. You never know." Her ring clicked against the armrest. I slid my tote closer with my foot and smiled. We were two women alone among hundreds, but our family noise was its own stadium. And in it, I had learned to lower my voice, to live in the footnotes where things can be true without being loud. She was dressed like it was an opening night, emerald silk and precise jewelry. A wide-strapped watch that always looked heavier than the time it carried. On the screen above the stage, the camera panned across rows of bright parents and proud siblings, and we all looked up. In that moment, my bracelet felt hotter, as if the lights had touched only it. I glanced down reflexively, smoothing my sleeve to see it no longer there, my wrist suddenly naked in the way an old scar stands out when you think of it. My hand closed over skin and bones. It took 1 second for the sensation to travel to my throat. It took 2 more for my eyes to sweep the floor. The program slipped from my lap soundlessly, and time did that strange compliance I've seen in crisis audits where the room bends to procedure. I did not shout, did not gasp, I did not grab. I placed my palm flat on the empty place where the bracelet had lived, as if pressing a stamp to certify absence. Then I looked at Nadia. She was watching the screen, leaning back, one ankle crossed over the other. A smile that hadn't had to earn itself. "Did you see that dean's hat?" She murmured as if we were still sharing the previous conversation. A fine dusting of powder along her jawline made her look carved. I stood, and my seat snapped up with a soft click that sounded like the bracelet's clasp, leaving my wrist in a memory played backward. "Stay," I said. "I need to get an usher." She made a show of touching my sleeve. "Don't make a scene," she said. The words buttery, warm, sliding off the knife of her mouth. I angled my body toward the aisle, breath steady, calves tight from the sudden shift. The smell of carnations grew sharper when I turned. At the aisle, a young woman in a black blazer with a laminated badge glanced up and saw my face. I held my wrist out, bare and quiet. "It was here," I said, 5 minutes ago. The usher's eyes flicked to the floor, the seats, then back to my wrist. Her radio crackled on her shoulder like a small storm. "Do you want to step forward with me for a moment?" she asked, voice low. I nodded. She looked past me and then met my eyes again in that trained, honest way. And I realized from the shape of her pity that she had already noticed the person sitting beside me. The emerald silk, the angles. "Ma'am," she said gently, "let me move you forward." We moved like water through the aisle, the hush of fabric and the soft squeak of soles. The ushers at the front made a tiny corridor, and the scent changed less powder and floor wax, more ink and coffee from the staff room door. One of them closed the velvet rope behind me with a soft swish that sounded ceremonial, like a ribbon cutting in reverse. I presented my wrist again, and they saw not panic, but method. "Tell me what you want to do," the senior usher said. Her name tag read Aaliyah. Her voice had that capable timbre of someone who understood crowds and claims. "Notify Security Chief Omar," I said, naming him because I had read the staffing chart and made a note of his radio call sign earlier when I went to the restroom. Because I am the kind of woman who studies the maps they put in clean frames. Have him review camera for Mezzanine West, timestamp 944 to 947. Ask the registrar's office to hold the post-ceremony reception doors until we clear one thing. And send a runner to the jewel appraiser, Mira Sethi. She's expecting a verification ping from me if this bracelet leaves my wrist before noon. Aaliyah's brows lifted, not in doubt but in a small salute. "Yes, ma'am," she said, and tapped her radio in a crisp rhythm that sent quiet electricity through the team. Back in row M, Nadia would be sitting with one ankle crossed, the watch heavy, the perfumes. I closed my eyes for one beat and saw my mother lifting the bracelet from a small velvet tray years ago, her mouth forming the words we all learned in the languages of inheritance and regret. It had been my present the night I got my chartered certification. The bracelet notarized in an appraisal and listed on an insurance schedule with a sum that felt like a misplaced phone number. It wasn't the money. It was the audit trail of a promise. The air cooled as we moved behind a curtain to a small anteroom where a metal table waited beside a coffee urn that gurgled quietly. Every sound suddenly magnified. Chief Omar arrived with his jacket open and his radio unclipped. Kind eyes missing nothing. The smell of rain on his shirt like a door to a different season. "Aaliyah briefed me," he said, and I appreciated that he didn't waste my time with the wrong questions. "Do you have an image of the piece?" I pulled the folded sheet from my tote, a certified appraisal photograph in grayscale. The clasp shone at 2 angles, the tiny hallmark circled in red ink. My mother's initials engraved on the inside link, like a secret signature. Omar leaned over it as if examining a map of contested territory. "Camera 4 covers your section obliquely," he said, "but camera 6 is closer to the aisle. We'll pull feeds. We won't stop the ceremony unless you ask. We'll simply watch and be ready." Procedure. The sweet logic of steps. I nodded. "We won't stop anything," I said. She stopped herself when the weight on her wrist starts to burn. Aaliyah's radio clicked twice. "Copy," someone said. Omar gestured to the chair. I remained standing. In the stadium, I could hear the saxophones begin a mellow nod to pomp and circumstance. I pictured Aisha in her black robe, tassel-heavy, hands steady on the railing as she lined up backstage. A thunder of applause rippled, contained and domestic. And I tried to imagine this not happening, this moment belonging to her alone. I inhaled. The room smelled like paper and silver thermos lids. I am not here to humiliate anyone, I told myself, but I am here to comply with the truth. Omar returned 4 minutes later with a tablet and a careful face. We had a brief obstruction when a graduate waved a sign, but camera 6 caught partials, he said. He set the tablet on the metal table. The image was high-angled, slightly fisheye. There I was in row M, leaning to tuck my tote. There, the bracelet bright at my wrist as I brushed my sleeve. There, Nadia's hand moving as she pretended to point at the screen. The click of a manicure, the practiced lift of a clasp. In the frame, her face didn't register intent, only artistry. It was almost beautiful, the economy of it. We watched the loop twice. Aaliyah watched my face. "Do you want us to approach her now?" Omar asked, not unkind. I shook my head once. "No, let's do this properly." My voice was cool. The plan I had filed in my mind months ago unfolded like a legal letter sliding from an envelope. The demand, the support, the remedy, the timeline. "Omar, can you photograph my wrist close-up?" He did, latex gloves snapping in the small room. And the room smelled faintly of rubber, A school science lab years after I needed one. He captured the indentation the bracelet had left, human timestamp, physical affidavit. He printed the photographs on the small thermal printer with the security team's logo, each image bearing a black border of authority. I dated and signed beneath. Aaliyah and Omar countersigned as witnesses. The noise of the printer sounded like a stamp machine at a municipal counter, a sound that always makes me feel safer. When I opened the thin envelope from my tote and slid the document out, the paper made the soft hush that good bond makes when it meets air. This is a notarized attestation of ownership with the appraisal certificate number and the insurance policy schedule, I said. And here is a prior email to the venue manager advising them of the piece and asking them to log any incident to my file. Aaliyah's expression didn't change. People who move crowds learn to keep their faces calm so others will borrow their equilibrium. And this, I said, lifting the last sheet, is a draft demand letter to any party found in possession of the item, with instructions for immediate return and for the institution to record the report pending police filing. I slid the letter back into the envelope and resealed it with a thumbnail press. A burst of applause rose, the kind that says a name just read belonged to someone's entire life. The air tasted like coffee suddenly, rich and dark. Omar's radio crackled. Chief camera team confirms subject stood, approached aisle briefly, then returned to seat. Object movement recorded. Time index marked. He looked at me. Your call, ma'am. I looked at the clock. It was not yet 10. There was time to do this without slicing the morning. Let her watch her daughter cross, I said, and I meant it. The words felt clean in my mouth like steel. We'll address it immediately after. Omar nodded slowly as if we were sealing a treaty. Aaliyah exhaled almost imperceptibly. Somewhere beneath the musicians, the AC hummed like a low, faithful engine. I stepped back into the aisle as quiet as I had left it. The ushers did that subtle maneuver again, creating a seam for me to pass, the carpet soft beneath my heels. A faint soap scent rising from its fibers. I returned to row M, third seat from the aisle, my tote where I left it, my sister seated as if she had never moved. Nadia turned her head just enough to offer a smile that asked me to be the one to restore normalcy. There you are, she said, and it was almost tender. Did you grab tissues? I think I'll cry when she walks. Your ring is lovely, I said. A beat of something traveled through her jaw. She slid her hand into her lap. I let the silence sit between us like a folded paper. The chancellor was speaking about resilience and public duty when I noticed the faintest flash near Nadia's cuff. A glint like a word you're not meant to hear. She had tucked the bracelet into that small hollow inside her sleeve near the wrist bone. It's a trick like a magician's, but it was hard to hide a thing that carried a name on its bones. The weight of it changed the way her hand hovered. My muscles softened. I watched the stage. Aisha rose when her row was signaled. Then she turned and scanned the crowd the way one looks for a lighthouse in weather. And when she found us, her face softened with relief and she lifted her hand, palm toward us, a small private wave. The air held a coolness as the cloud cover shifted across the high windows, the light thinning to silk for a moment. I wanted to freeze the room. Stamp time? Have a clerk quietly record this exact breath in a ledger with ink that would not fade. When Aisha's name was read, she powered across the stage. Not showy, just efficient. I clapped. I whooped once. I watched her accept a folder containing the symbol of a future she had built with discipline more than talent. Because discipline was a talent that never received applause of its own. Nadia's hands trembled, the bracelet in her cuff tapping once against the metal link of her watch. I leaned toward her and said, as gently as I could, I'll walk with you to the reception. She glanced at me, calculating. Of course, she said. And then, with a very small smile, you'll behave. My mouth almost curled. The old familiar sting of being the one who is asked to behave rose like smoke. I looked at the aisle. An usher looked back, her expression neutral as a page. Seems I'm not family. After the recessional, the room turned from church to railway station. Seats fanned open, people spilled into aisles. The air thickened with heat and fragrance and the sweet chemical of fresh balloon ribbons. I moved with the stream, always 2 steps behind Nadia, watching as she touched her sleeve without touching it. The tell of anyone carrying something that wasn't theirs. We reached the reception hall doors and an usher graciously lifted the rope for us, then let it sway back, the soft chime of its hook like a tiny bell I would hear again in dreams. A table near the entrance bore name tags in neat rows. A tray of champagne flutes like a keyboard you could play with the right pressure. The registrar, Ms. Ligari, stood near a podium, her lipstick a clean scarlet that never bled. She met my eye, and there was a thin notch of recognition. The email, the heads up, the person who puts things in writing. Congratulations, I told Nadia, and I meant that too. The mood needed to be managed, not manipulated. The difference is procedural. I lifted a glass and she took one without drinking, a small tremor at her wrist as the bracelet shifted inside her cuff. Hold this, she said, passing me the glass as if I were the assistant of her life. I took it and placed it on the table, aligning its base with a water ring. She looked around for Aisha, who was submerged in a sea of hugs near the far wall. Let's go, she said. But I did not move. Security Chief Omar, I said, and he was there because good teams do not miss their marks. He approached without haste, a notepad in hand he did not open. Ma'am, he said to me. He looked at Nadia, his gaze moved to the registrar, who had quietly stepped to our triangle and become a fourth point. The temperature of the room shifted 1 degree cooler as the doors behind us were attended to by 2 ushers who looked like friends. Nadia's smile hardened by an atom. Is there a problem? She asked Omar, performing innocence like expensive theater. Omar kept his voice level. We have a report and a preliminary observation, he said. We'd like to resolve a property matter privately and quickly so the graduates can celebrate. The room smelled like cut fruit under bright light. The hum of voices made a wall that gave us privacy by being too loud. There's nothing to resolve, Nadia said smoothly, unless my sister has decided to accuse me of something for old time's sake. The registrar's eyes flicked to me for the smallest of seconds. The way a judge looks at a paper in a bench trial before stamping a motion. I held my tote close, like a file behind glass. I did not raise my voice. I did not step closer. Would you show us the inside of your right cuff? I asked, the words not an accusation but a request for compliance. It is a tone that unsettles those who rely on chaos. Nadia's chin tilted. This is ridiculous, she said. I'm not undressing for you. Omar shook his head gently. No undressing, he said. Just a look. She turned her body slightly, an old dancer's habit, guarding the wrist as if it were a pocket that needed a decoy. I have a document, I said, and slipped the envelope from my tote. The paper made that breath again as I drew it out. This is a notarized attestation of ownership, a certified appraisal image, and a draft demand letter addressed to the party in possession of the bracelet pictured here. I tapped the grayscale image. The registrar accepted the sheets with the gravity of a judge accepting exhibits. She read quickly, eyes trained by years of processing petitions and petitions about petitions. She held the page with the photograph up near the light, and the platinum link shone like a bureaucrat's smile, too bright to be trusted, but precise. Nadia laughed, a single note, the sound of a knife tapped on a crystal rim to get attention. You bring legal paperwork to a graduation now? She said loud enough that 2 nearby parents glanced over with polite curiosity. You always were dramatic. I didn't look at them. I sent the email advising the venue about the item on Monday. I said not to her, but to the registrar, who nodded. We are simply executing the process I filed. Omar's eye said thank you to the word executing, which is a kind of spell in Security 1 that chooses order over heat. Fine, Nadia said, breath a shade faster. Look at my cuffs here. She raised her left wrist first, innocent, empty, the watch chain glittering. Then she raised the right, careless, almost bored. The bracelet fell from her cuff with a tiny bright clink on too. The white tablecloth like a coin in a jar when you don't want the coin to be heard. The sound was quiet, devastating, undisguisable. She tried to cover it with her palm and came up with the watch strap instead. And in the space of that fumble, the registrar had already placed her hand lightly on the table, establishing a jurisdictional surface. Each of us inhaled separately. Omar's latex gloves appeared, tactical in their gentleness. He did not snatch. He lifted. The bracelet looked suddenly both heavier and smaller, an object made of memory and law. He set it on a clean folded napkin, took 2 photographs on his phone. Faye then handed the phone to Aaliyah, who had arrived like a punctuation mark you didn't know the sentence needed. Aaliyah transmitted the images to the incident report thread. I watched the progress bar move, then resolve like a tiny version of justice. Nadia tried to move into indignation, but found the doorway jammed. I was safeguarding it, she said, and I admired the quick pivot, the elegant attempt. She was flustered, and it was loose, and I didn't want her to lose it in the crowd. Her voice asked us to believe we'd misread a stage direction. I kept my mouth closed and let the silence put her words. On a scale. They weighed thin. I have video of you removing it, I said finally, quiet as paper sliding across wood. I have a time stamp, a witness statement, and an email advising the institution to log any property incidents and to notify me before the item left my wrist. My own voice felt like a chain pulled with measured force. The registrar placed the photograph face up near the bracelet and compared clasp to clasp, hallmark to hallmark. The engraving matches, she said. Even her lipstick seemed to nod. Nadia opened her mouth, closed it. In that small tremor, I saw all our family Christmases. Every time she arranged truth-like furniture and made me the one in the corner seat. It isn't that I hate her, I told myself. It's that theft is a kind of unlove that performs itself with a straight back. I looked past her to the crowd and found Aisha's face again. Bright, distracted, oblivious for now to this awful pivot her day had taken. I thought of the weight a mother's theft puts on a daughter's ceremony. My fingers were steady in a way that felt like fate, agreeing with procedure. Omar opened a small evidence envelope and we all watched the bracelet slide into it with a whisper. He wrote the time, the location, the names of the parties and witnesses. Surveyed his gentle handwriting for accuracy, then sealed the flap and had the registrar and me countersign. The registrar stamped the seal with the university's incident stamp, the ink a deep blue. Things are real when they are witnessed, when they carry an audit trail that outlives the hour. Do you want to press charges? Omar asked me, neutral, present. The band on the far side of the room had started a light jazz set. Sax breathing warm through long notes that made a summer out of a concrete hall. A balloon bobbed against the ceiling, tapping the lights with a soft vinyl sound like a polite ghost. Not yet, I said. First, I want her to listen. I turned to Nadia. I could feel the air cooling near the doors as Ushers kept the flow gentle. You will return the bracelet to my wrist now. You will acknowledge that you removed it without my consent. You will allow a photograph of the return. Then you will listen as the registrar reads the policy language on theft in this venue. And you will sign the incident report acknowledging these facts. After the reception, you will walk with me to the security office, where we will record a brief statement. Then you will leave. We will discuss consequences with appropriate parties tomorrow at noon. She stared at me like I had spoken a new language in which she would never be fluent. You can't talk to me like I'm a criminal, she said, body tight, mouth a white line. I'm your sister. I inhaled gently and let the coolness in the air settle on my wrists. Siblingship is not an immunity clause, I said. It is a line in the file. It does not alter the facts. She glanced to each of the 3 people around us as if searching for a weaker link. Found none, and came to rest on Omar, whose kindness and training made him a wall without edges. Fine, she said finally, her voice a thing soldered to itself. Let's get this over with. The registrar handed Omar the evidence envelope, and he opened it with the care of a jeweler. Tipped the bracelet onto the napkin and lifted it lightly. The metal touched my skin like a memory returning, cool at first. Then settling to my warmth with a rightness that made my eyes pinch for one hard second. Omar photographed the clasp on my wrist, the engraving facing the inside the way it always had. Aaliyah entered the photo as a witness, her face a study in good work, done well. "Thank you." The registrar said, the words addressing me and the room and the process itself. She read the policy paragraph in an even tone, words that had been written before we were born to deal with us when we arrived. Nadia signed the incident report with a small flourish that looked like pride turned brittle. I signed mine with a hand that didn't shake. Omar stamped the report. We had executed, recorded, witnessed, countersigned. Only then did I turn to find Aisha in the crowd. The lights over the buffet gave everything a forgiving glow, and she slipped through people like a thread, her gown fluttering, her face flushed. The scent of citrus shampoo passing brief and pure. "There you are," she said, lifting her arms. We hugged, and in that small shelter I weighed whether to tell her now. Her happiness pressed against me like a good weather day you know can't last, but deserves to be lived fully while it does. "Proud of you," I said into her hair. She pulled back, eyes quick, noticing everything. "Is everything okay?" she asked, because daughters always know before mothers tell them. "Yes," I said, which was true enough for one more hour. "We're going to get a photo with the registrar," I added. And IE lit up in that way she always did for official stages, because she had earned her proximity to them. We took the photo. We drank one slim glass of sparkling something. We laughed for a few small minutes like nothing had a ledger. By the time the crowd thinned and the flowers smelled tired, we walked to the security office. It's a cool room with frosted glass and the soundproofed quiet of serious business. Omar recorded the statements. I gave mine in a straight line. The time, the observation, the approach, the policy, the resolution. The printer worked hard again, and we each initialed and signed, and the registrar took her stamped copies. Nadia sat very still, mouth soft now, not because she was sad, but because she was calculating a new arrangement. When it was her turn, she began with the sentence of every apology that is not an apology. If I did anything wrong, to which the registrar said, in a voice like a string pulled tight, "You removed property you do not own from the person of its owner. Please say that." Nadia closed her eyes and said the words. The lights hummed overhead. The air smelled like new paper. When it was over, I asked Omar for a minute in the hall with my sister. He understood. We stood by the vending machine and the hand sanitizer dispenser. Those twin altars of modern life, and the hallway's cool air exaggerated the heat of my bracelet against my pulse. The floor was clean enough to eat from. The light was that tender, late-morning light that suggests mercy if you can find it. I studied my sister's face, its beauty not yet unused by the world. "I'm going to do two things," I said quietly. "I'm going to follow this fully so that a record exists and you learn the shape of consequence. And I'm going to make sure Aisha doesn't carry it on her back." Nadia's eyes flickered. "You're going to ruin her day," she said. And there was a tiny, righteous spark in it, as if the world owed her a different sister. "You tried to ruin my name," I said, still gentle. "And my mother's hand. The bracelet warm now, like skin. We will hold both truths. I have already filed a note with the insurer. If this incident results in any fraudulent claim, it will be rescinded. The jeweler will log this event in the appraisal file. The registrar will record your name in their internal incident log for a 3-year term. I will send a copy of the incident report to our attorney, Rumi, for a formal letter that I will hold and not serve unless you breach again. You will reimburse my cost of time today. You will contribute to Aisha's student loan in the amount of the appraised premium. And I will audit your payments monthly until the balance is cleared." She flinched. "You don't have the right," she began, but the words sounded unfunded. "I have the paper," I said. "And more importantly, I have the choice to be careful with you and firm with the facts." She stared at the floor, and for a small breath I saw the girl she had been. Quick and agile, and always reaching for the shiny thing in the center of the table. "You like making me small," she said. I shook my head. "I like making the truth the right size," I said. "You make your own dark corners." She turned as if to end the meeting by leaving, but found the hallway longer than her will. That afternoon, Aisha found me near the university gate, a small envelope in her hand, the paper slightly damp from her palm. "I want you to have this," she said. Inside was a photograph of the three of us at her elementary school career day. My arms full of folders, Nadia posing like a billboard. Aisha looking at the camera with a look like she could read you if she wanted and spare you if she didn't. You were both there, Shay said. That was all I needed then. My throat tightened in that specific way that means the body is doing math to divide a moment into before and after. I put the photo back carefully and approved its feelings with a thumb on the edge. I spent the evening after the ceremony writing letters that were not about anger but about accuracy. At my kitchen table, with a room smelling faintly of lemon cleaner, and a single jasmine stem in a small vase doing the absolute most it could, I prepared the packet, the registrar's stamped incident report, the photos, the notarized attestation, the insurance policy addendum, the jeweler's appraisal certificate, the email chain with the venue manager confirming receipt of my advisory, the chain of custody form for the temporary transfer to security during the incident, the USB with the CCTV clip timestamped and redacted for public faces. I wrote a brief cover note to Rumi. Please draft a letter articulating the civil contours of this intrusion, leaving room for the mercy I intend and the boundary I require. I printed the letter on my thickest paper. The printer warmed the room like a small pillow of heat. I created a separate file for Aisha, a clean narrative of what had happened and what would happen next, with procedural words that were calm because they were precise, recorded, witnessed, filed, countersigned. Victims often feel like the process steals them a second time. I wanted her to see that process could be a friend if you hold its hand tightly enough. I printed it and sealed it with a sticker she had made in high school, a tiny book with tiny gold stars. I smiled at my own corny heart. The next morning, I met Rumi at his office, a room that smelled like cardamom tea and dry envelopes. His tie is silk, so matte it drank the light. He read everything twice. Then, with the small pleasure of good law applied to human mess, drafted a letter that established facts, named remedies. Paused where we would be generous, resumed where we would be hard. The verbs lined up like a set of wrenches. Demanded, reserved, warned, offered, acknowledged. Do you want this served? He asked. Not yet, I said, and he nodded the way a man nods at a spade he respects. Keep it, I said. Like an umbrella we might not need, he smiled. I like rain gear, he said, signing with a fountain pen whose nib whispered like a secret. We walked to the bank together because the world should see some things done in daylight. The bank manager, Priya, greeted me with that mixture of courtesy and worry reserved for complex customers, in her glass-walled office with a rubber plant aspiring to be a tree. We sat and I presented the incident number and requested a flag in the fraud monitoring system for any attempts to insure, appraise, pawn, or transfer a bracelet of that description. Priya tapped her keyboard with the care of a surgeon closing a chest. We can set a passive alert across local branches and notify the jeweler consortium of the incident code, she said. No personal data beyond what you consent to. She printed the form. I read every line and initialed where the margins asked. She stamped the top with a date so crisp it could cut fruit. At noon, as promised, I met Nadia at our mother's old house because old fights like to be staged on old floors. The house smelled faintly of cedar and the dust of disuse. She had already let herself in, the way some people treat a deed as perpetual permission. Her face was pale without the stage lights. You brought a lawyer, she said, handling the word like a dish towel she would throw in the sink. He's at his office, I said. This is between us as adults who sign things. I placed the stack of forms on the dining table, the wood burnished by 1,000 small dinners that still lived in its pores. I showed her the payment schedule for ISO's loans, modest and fair. I showed her the draft letter Rumi would not serve unless she tripped the boundary again. A civil action held in reserve like a shadow made polite. I showed her the receipt for my time, the calculation fair and uncomplicated. I showed her the email I would send to the registrar and insurer, confirming that we had reached internal closure contingent on her compliance. Each document was a room she could enter with her name on the wall. This is humiliating, she said, but the tone had shifted. She had found the pitch where shame pretends its dignity. No, I said. This is precise. I slid a pen across the table. It made the soft sound of instruments laid down in an operating room when the work is almost done. She signed the schedule with that small flourish again, the one that tried to make a signature a personality. She folded her arms when I asked for the second signature. In the air lay the faint scent of lemon oil and something colder, like metal under water. "You're enjoying this," she accused. "There are times when the truth is not a chastity belt, but a shield." "I'm enjoying that a thing that should be is," I said. "I'm enjoying that my wrists are mine." She stared, then looked at the bracelet, then somewhere past me at a childhood I apparently had lived differently. She signed the second page. A bolt slid into place in the house of the day. In the weeks that followed, the ripples moved outward with a quiet that felt almost like grief's second cousin. The registrar updated the internal policy to include a reminder to all staff about procedures for reported theft at ceremonies, emphasizing that calm often outperforms force. Aaliyah received a commendation letter that I wrote and sent through 3 channels because good people should be documented as carefully as bad acts. The university's newsletter ran a sentence about enhanced incident response protocols, a phrase that domesticated embarrassment while improving the future. Omar's team ran a small in-service on chain of custody with a demonstration using a trophy from a past event, his latex gloves snapping like drumsticks in a soft band. Mira, the jeweler, logged the incident in the appraisal file and added a discreet engraving only. I could see with the little loop she placed in my palm. A new micromark, like a punctuation mark on the inside edge. Sometimes we add a comma to a sentence so it reads right, she said, smiling as she cleaned the bracelet with a cloth that smelled like orange peel and careful hands. The insurance company recorded the incident, added a note to my file that said, "Owner is proactive." Excellent documentation. A compliment I kept like a sticker you don't want to use yet. Nadia made the payments, at first with reluctance, then with a mechanical efficiency that told me she would rather be praised for compliance than loved for honesty. When the third payment came late, I sent a short email with the subject line "Schedule Reminder." The body, a single sentence, "Per our signed plan. Please remit by Friday," and a PDF of the signed schedule attached. It went through like insulin. She did not call. Aisha, meanwhile, set up a small automatic transfer from her new job to an emergency fund. And when she texted me a screenshot of the confirmation, the subject line read, "First grown-up thing," and the emoji looked like a trophy, if trophies could blush. On a Saturday 2 months later, after the heat had retreated, like a responsibility fulfilled, I walked into a community legal clinic where I sometimes volunteer and gave a brief talk on keeping records that can hold you up when the room tilts. I brought photocopies of a redacted version of the incident report. It's a chain of custody form with the sensitive fields blacked out. The letter template Rumi had refined to be general and strong. I showed the group how to take photographs of an injury or an absence, how to date them, add a note, request a countersignature, retain originals. The room smelled like dry erase markers and hope. People took notes with the intensity of students who believe they will use what you are teaching not on a test, but in a life they want to keep. It would be easy to say, "I forgave my sister," and then we held hands at a barbecue where someone grilled fish and the lemon scent rose bright in the dusk. It would be easy to write that we returned to normal. But the truth is better and less clean. We entered a new ledger where the liabilities and assets were both written in honest ink. She sent me a birthday message that was neither warm nor cold. I sent her a photograph of a jasmine plant I had repotted and decided to keep alive. I saw her at Aisha's apartment once, her eyes lingering half a second on my wrist before she composed her face. She asked if the bracelet was heavy. "Light," I said. Now, we did not hug. We did not need to draft new documents that day. The last of the administrative ripples arrived 6 months after the ceremony. An email from the insurer with a rate adjustment downward because of my enhanced preventive measures. A phrase that made me laugh alone in my kitchen with the jasmine durable even in winter. There are rewards that come not from getting back what was taken, but from building such a bright paper trail that the next attempt sees it and turns away. And there was one more small victory, the kind that barely registers on paper, but that I stamped in my private ledger with a sticker shaped like a star. Aisha and I went to the campus one evening to watch an outdoor film, and as we crossed the courtyard, Aaliyah called out, "Front row for you," with that usher's grace that turns a phrase into infrastructure. We laughed and sat. And the air smelled like popcorn and cut grass and the kind of cool that makes you pull a sweater close. Midway through the movie, Aisha leaned her head on my shoulder. A gesture that would have been a public event when she was 13 and now is just a sentence we both knew how to read. There's a line my family tried to put in my mouth for years. That silence keeps peace. I've learned a better one. That process keeps dignity. In the slow illumination of paperwork and countersigned truth, I discovered that you can be both kind and exacting. That you can have a wrist that carries history and a hand that won't tremble when it writes the word served or recorded. I learned that ceremony is stronger when it isn't asked to carry theft in its skirt. Weeks became months, and the bracelet simply lived on me again, not as a warning, but as a witness. I hope that one day when Aisha wraps it around her wrist, the clasp will click with the sound of a promise well kept, not a weapon. I hope that when the light strikes it in some future room, she will think not of theft, but of a woman who used paper and calm and a simple, operative verbs to make a morning right-sized again. On an evening just past winter's edge, I sat by a window with the last natural light painting the floor a soft steel, and the room smelled like tea and something new. And I wrote one final letter to myself, dated, signed, placed in a folder labeled home in a handwriting that had become fight and lullaby at once. Seems I'm not family, but I am a keeper of facts, a witness who also sets the table. A woman who will walk into a room with one thing on her wrist and a pocket full of forms, and will leave with both still mine. The ushers will move me forward when they hear, and I will move the day back into its place when it tilts, not with noise, but with the quiet genius of an incident report. A notarized line, an honest stamp. Then I will go home, feed the jasmine, and write down what happened so that when the next ceremony comes, the path will be clean before we even lay out the chairs. If this story landed for you, share it with someone who trusts process more than drama. Want another dignified justice tale like this? Tell me a title and I'll build the case.